The key was taped underneath a photograph of my grandmother. I found it 3 days after her funeral. It was a small brass key, old enough that the metal had turned almost black around the edges. There was a handwritten tag attached to it. 4 numbers were written on the tag, 404. Underneath them was my grandmother's handwriting. Only use this when the house is silent. At first I thought it was some kind of joke, then I found the second note. And that's when I realized my grandmother had spent the last 40 years hiding a room inside her house. A room that wasn't supposed to exist. This is Tales of the Dark. My grandmother's house had been in our family for almost 70 years. It wasn't a mansion or anything particularly impressive. It was a 2-story brick house on a quiet street, with 3 bedrooms upstairs, a bathroom, a kitchen, a living room, and a small basement. I had spent a lot of time there growing up. I knew the house better than almost anyone. I knew which floorboards creaked. I knew the bathroom door didn't close properly. I knew the 3rd step on the staircase made a loud cracking sound if you put your weight on the right side. And I knew there were exactly 3 bedrooms upstairs. So when my grandmother died and I became responsible for cleaning out the house, I wasn't expecting to find anything unusual. Mostly, I expected it to be depressing. Every room still looked like she had simply stepped out for a few minutes. Her glasses were sitting beside the television. A half-finished crossword puzzle was still on the kitchen table. There were old photographs everywhere. She had never been the type of person to throw things away. So I spent several days sorting through boxes, clothes, books, receipts, old Christmas decorations, family photographs. Eventually, I started cleaning her bedroom. That's where I found the first photograph. It was an old family picture taken in the backyard. My grandmother was standing beside my grandfather. My mother was probably about 10 years old, and there I was too. I couldn't have been more than 5. I picked the photograph up because I didn't remember seeing it before. There was something strange about it. The picture had been mounted inside a thick wooden frame. When I turned it over, I noticed a small piece of yellow tape underneath. I pulled it away. Something metallic fell onto the carpet. The key. It landed with a tiny click. At first, I thought it was an ordinary old key. Then I noticed the tag, 404. I turned it over. That was when I saw the handwriting. Only use this when the house is silent. I stared at it for a long time. My first thought was that she'd probably hidden the key for some old cabinet or safe, maybe something in the basement. The number 404 could have been an old room number from somewhere. It didn't necessarily have anything to do with the house. I put the key in my pocket and continued cleaning. About an hour later, I found something else. A folded piece of paper inside the bottom drawer of her nightstand. There were only 3 sentences. You will eventually find the key, don't ask your mother about it, and don't open the door after midnight. I stopped reading. I read it again, then again. My grandmother had written those words. There was no doubt about it. I immediately thought about calling my mother. Then I remembered the second sentence. Don't ask your mother about it. That made the whole thing feel different. If it was something harmless, why would Grandma specifically tell me not to ask my mother? I put the note back in the drawer. I decided I would deal with it later. That night I stayed at the house. I was planning to spend another few days cleaning before putting it on the market. Around 11, I was sitting downstairs when I heard something above me. 3 footsteps, slow, one after another. I looked toward the ceiling, then there was another, a heavier step. I assumed it was the old house settling. It happened all the time. I went upstairs to check anyway, nothing. The hallway was empty, my grandmother's bedroom was open, the other 3 bedrooms were empty too. I checked every room, nothing. I was about to go back downstairs when I heard something else, a chair scraping across the floor. It sounded like it came from behind my grandmother's bedroom wall. I walked back into her room. The sound stopped. I stood there listening, nothing. Then I noticed the mirror. It was a huge antique mirror that had been hanging on the wall beside her bed for as long as I could remember. I had always assumed there was nothing behind it, but for some reason, I remembered my grandmother moving that mirror when I was a kid. Not often. Just occasionally, and whenever she did, she would get strangely irritated if anyone asked why. I walked over to it, I tried moving it, it barely shifted, the frame was extremely heavy, I eventually gave up. I went downstairs, I told myself I was imagining things because I was tired. The next morning I started looking at the house differently. I had the original floor plans because they were in a folder my grandmother kept in the basement. I unfolded them across the kitchen table. The plans showed the 3 bedrooms upstairs, the hallway, the bathroom, the staircase. Everything looked normal, but something bothered me. The exterior dimensions of the house didn't match the interior. I measured the upstairs hallway, then I measured the bedrooms, then the bathroom. I added everything together. There was roughly 6 feet of space missing, not 6 inches, 6 feet. There should have been another section of the house. I checked my measurements, then I checked them again. I thought maybe I had misunderstood the plans, so I went outside. I measured the exterior wall beneath my grandmother's bedroom. Then I came back inside and measured the same section from the interior. The difference was still there, approximately 6 feet. I stood in the hallway staring at the wall. There was nothing unusual about it, just old wallpaper, a small picture frame, and the antique mirror in my grandmother's bedroom on the other side. I suddenly remembered the key in my pocket, 404. I went downstairs and searched the basement. There was no safe, no cabinet, no old door, nothing with a lock that matched the key. Then I checked every door in the house. Nothing. The key didn't fit any of them. That evening I called my mother. I didn't mention the key. I asked her a simple question. Did Grandma ever have another room upstairs? There was a long silence. Then she asked me why I was asking. I told her I had been looking through the floor plans. She said the house had always had 3 bedrooms. I asked her if she remembered the mirror in Grandma's room. Another silence. Then she said something I'll never forget. Don't move that mirror. I asked her why. She wouldn't explain. She just told me to finish cleaning the house and leave the mirror alone. Then she changed the subject. I didn't push her, but now I was certain there was something she wasn't telling me. That night I waited until the house was completely quiet. It was around 1 in the morning. I went upstairs. I stood in my grandmother's bedroom. The house was silent, exactly as the note had instructed. I grabbed the mirror with both hands. This time I managed to move it. It slid across the floor several inches. Behind it was a wall. At first I felt stupid. There was nothing there, just old plaster. Then I noticed a thin vertical line running from the floor to almost the ceiling. I touched it. It was a door frame. A completely concealed door. There was no handle, no visible hinges, just a rectangular outline hidden beneath layers of paint and wallpaper. My heart started beating faster. I ran my fingers along the edge, then I found it, a tiny keyhole. I pulled the brass key from my pocket. For several seconds I just held it there. I thought about my grandmother's note. Only use this when the house is silent. I thought about the second note, don't ask your mother about it. And finally, don't open the door after midnight. I looked at the clock. It was 1:17 a.m. I had already broken one rule. I had moved the mirror, but I hadn't opened the door, not yet. I inserted the key. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with almost no resistance, and immediately I heard something on the other side, not a voice. Not breathing, something much simpler. A chair moving across a floor. The same sound I had heard the night before. I froze. There was someone inside, or something had just moved. I slowly pulled the key back, then I heard 3 footsteps. 1, 2, 3. They stopped directly on the other side of the door. I didn't move, neither did whatever was behind it. For several seconds we stood there separated by a thin piece of wood. Then something touched the other side of the door. A single knock. I stepped backward. Another knock. Then a third, exactly 3 knocks. I wanted to leave. Every instinct I had told me to walk downstairs, get into my car and never come back. But then I noticed something beneath the door, a thin strip of darkness, and slowly, a photograph was pushed underneath it. It stopped against my shoe. I bent down and picked it up. It was an old photograph. The edges were yellow and curled. I turned it over. There was a date written on the back, 1998. I looked at the front. My grandmother was standing in the hidden room. She was much younger. Beside her was my mother, and sitting on the floor between them was me. I was 6 years old. I stared at the photograph because I had never seen that room before. At least, I thought I hadn't. Then I noticed the man standing behind my grandmother, and I recognized him. It was my grandfather, the same grandfather who had died 2 years before I was born. I couldn't breathe. I looked at the photograph again. My grandmother, my mother, me, and my grandfather standing behind them. The date on the back said 1998. My grandfather had died in 1996. I turned the photograph over again, hoping I had somehow read the date wrong. I hadn't. Then I looked at the door. Something was still standing on the other side. I could see the faint shadow of feet beneath the gap. I stepped backward. The shadow didn't move. I waited. Nothing. Then slowly the shadow disappeared. I heard footsteps moving away from the door. 1, 2, 3, then silence. I didn't open the door that night. I took the photograph downstairs and locked myself inside the kitchen. I barely slept. The next morning I called my mother. This time I didn't ask her anything casually. I told her about the key, the door, the photograph, everything. She didn't speak for several seconds. Then she said something that completely changed the way I looked at my grandmother. She said, "Your grandfather didn't die in 1996. I thought I had misunderstood her. What? He disappeared in 1996. She explained that the family had always been told he died. That was the story everyone had been given, but there had never been a body. There had never been a funeral. There had only been an empty car found several miles from the house. My mother was a child at the time. My grandmother told her that her father had died, and for years my mother believed it, until she was an adult. That's when Grandma finally told her the truth. My grandfather had been involved in something the family wasn't supposed to know about. My mother wouldn't tell me exactly what it was. She said it involved people coming to the house late at night, people she never knew, people my grandfather told her never to speak about. And then one night he disappeared. My grandmother told everyone he had left. She told my mother never to ask questions. Then she sealed the hidden room. I asked my mother why. She said she didn't know, but there was one thing she remembered. When she was young, she had once seen my grandfather take someone into that room, a man. She didn't know who he was. She only remembered that the man was frightened, and my grandfather had told her to go back to bed. My mother said she never saw that man again. I asked her why she had never told me about the room. She said because my grandmother made her promise, and because she had spent most of her life believing that whatever happened inside that room was over. Then she said, "Your grandmother was terrified of that room." I looked at the photograph sitting on the kitchen table. If she was terrified of it, why did she leave me the key? My mother didn't answer. I knew she didn't have one, so I went back upstairs. In daylight, the hidden door looked less frightening. It looked like an old construction mistake. A piece of the house that someone had tried to erase, but now I knew what was behind it. I moved the mirror. I put the key into the lock. This time I opened the door. The smell hit me first. Dust, old wood, and something faintly chemical. The room was small, maybe 10 feet wide. There was an old mattress against one wall, a wooden chair, a desk, a filing cabinet, and dozens of photographs. The room looked like someone had stopped using it decades ago. Nothing supernatural, nothing impossible, just an old hidden room. But the photographs made my stomach turn. They covered almost the entire wall. My grandmother, my grandfather, my mother, family gatherings, birthday parties, Christmas, me as a child. Some photographs had dates written on them, others didn't. And then I noticed something strange. Almost every photograph had been taken from the same angle, from inside the room. Someone had been watching the family. For years, I opened the filing cabinet. Inside were folders, names, dates, addresses, phone numbers. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I recognized one of the names. It belonged to a man who had lived 2 houses away from my grandmother. I remembered him. He had died years ago. I opened another folder. Another neighbor, another name, then another. My grandfather had been documenting people, not just strangers. People who lived around the house, people my family knew. Some files contained photographs, some contained handwritten notes, some contained descriptions of people's routines when they left for work, when they came home, who visited them when their houses were empty. I felt sick. This wasn't a secret room for storing family memories. My grandfather had been using it to watch people, but there was something else. A folder with my grandmother's name on it. I opened it. The first page was dated 1996. The final page was dated 2001. I read everything. My grandfather had become increasingly paranoid during the final years of his life. He believed someone was watching him. He started documenting everyone around him, including his own family. He had cameras installed throughout the house. Some were hidden inside clocks, others were concealed behind vents. My grandmother eventually discovered what he had been doing. She confronted him. According to her notes, he became violent. She wrote that she was afraid he would hurt my mother, so she did something drastic. She secretly removed the recordings and hid them inside the room. Then she changed the lock. My grandfather disappeared several weeks later, but my grandmother didn't destroy his files. She kept them because she believed someone else might eventually come looking for them. That's why she maintained the room. That's why she moved the mirror. That's why she never allowed anyone to renovate that section of the house. She wasn't protecting a secret. She was protecting the evidence. Then I found something that explained the photograph. At the bottom of the filing cabinet was a small cassette recorder. Beside it was a handwritten note. My grandmother's handwriting. It said, "If you're reading this, you found the room." I pressed play. Her voice came through the tiny speaker. She sounded much older than I remembered. She said that my grandfather had disappeared after she confronted him, but she didn't believe he was dead. She believed he had been hiding somewhere, and she believed someone had helped him, someone who knew about the room. She said she kept the room locked because she was afraid that if the wrong person discovered what was inside, they would come back for the evidence. Then she said something that stopped me cold. She said, "Your grandfather was not the only person who knew about this room." The recording continued. She explained that after he disappeared, she occasionally found things moved inside the room. A chair, a folder, a photograph. Once she found muddy footprints leading from the hidden door to the basement. She had never seen anyone, but she knew someone had been entering the room. That's why she eventually stopped sleeping upstairs. That's why she always moved the mirror before going to bed. She wanted to know if someone had entered. If the mirror moved back into position, she knew nobody had touched the door. If it shifted even slightly, someone had been inside. I looked at the mirror, then at the door. And suddenly I understood why my grandmother had written, "Only use this when the house is silent." She wasn't warning me about ghosts. She was warning me about people. I searched the rest of the room. Behind the filing cabinet, I found another door. This one was much smaller. It led into a narrow passage between the walls. The passage eventually reached the basement, and from the basement there was a concealed exit leading outside. Someone could enter the hidden room without going through the main house. That explained the footsteps, the noises. The things my grandmother thought were being moved. Someone had access to the room, and they had probably had it for years. I called the police. They searched the house. They found the passage. They found the files. They found old surveillance equipment, and eventually they found something else. A fingerprint on the inside of the hidden door. It didn't belong to my grandmother, it didn't belong to my mother, and it didn't belong to me. The police couldn't identify it, but they did find something in the basement. A recent footprint, not decades old. Recent. Someone had been using the passage, possibly very recently. That explained the footsteps I had heard before opening the door. Someone may actually have been inside the room that night. I gave everything to the police. The photographs, the files, the recordings, the key. I didn't keep anything. Except one photograph, the one showing me as a child. I couldn't explain why. Maybe because I wanted to understand why I had been inside that room. My mother eventually admitted something she had never told me. When I was 6 years old, my grandfather had disappeared only weeks before that photograph was taken. She remembered me being taken somewhere inside the house. She remembered my grandmother telling her not to ask questions, but she had assumed I had simply been playing downstairs. She never knew about the room. That meant the photograph was real. I had been inside room 404, I just didn't remember it. A few months later, I sold the house. I couldn't live there. I couldn't even walk past the upstairs bedroom without thinking about that door. The new owners renovated the entire second floor. They removed the mirror. They replaced the walls. As far as I know, they never discovered the hidden passage. I thought that was the end of it until almost a year later. I received a small envelope in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of the hidden room. The room had been completely emptied. The filing cabinet was gone. The mattress was gone. The photographs were gone. Everything was gone except for the wooden chair. Someone had placed it in the center of the room, and sitting in the chair was a person. Their face had been scratched out with something sharp. I turned the photograph over. There was a date written on the back. It was tomorrow's date. I still don't know who took that photograph. I don't know who sent it. And I don't know whether the person sitting in that chair was my grandfather, someone who had been helping him, or someone completely unrelated. But there is one thing I know. My grandmother didn't leave me that key because she wanted me to discover a family secret. She left it because she knew that eventually someone would find the room again, and she wanted me to know what was inside before they did. That was the end of this story. If you've ever experienced something you still can't explain or have a strange story of your own, send it to Tales of the Dark. Your story could become the next nightmare featured on this channel. If you are new here, subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare.